two different perspectives here. One coming from America, growing up in America, and one from Taiwan. When you're growing up as children, especially when you're in the scenario of growing up as Taiwanese American, you tend to identify with your parents. You tend to say, I'm Taiwanese because my parents are Taiwanese. But at what point for you, when you were growing up, did you realize that this is my identity and this is what is important to me? And what caused that? Because I have many friends that, their parents are Taiwanese, but they themselves call them Chinese just because everyone says you're all the same, just like Jack said in your book. It's a very interesting way, like how do you go about that? Because it is difficult, especially because there is a lot of mixed blood, especially with Siraya and Chinese. It's difficult to understand, like, well, what role does culture play? How do I identify myself as being Taiwanese without my Chinese blood coming into it? And what gives me the right to do that versus calling myself Taiwanese Chinese American? And it's a difficult role or a difficult place to be in, to identify yourself as Taiwanese, especially when you express yourself to other people and, hey, I'm Taiwanese, and they think you're Thai. It's a difficult situation to be in. And so at what point did you in your lives, being in completely different places, one being in America, one being in Taiwan, how did you come to the point where you really rooted yourself in being Taiwanese? Sorry, loaded question.
So I'm sort of a graft in the sense that my parents, so mom is from Hong Kong and my dad is from Malaysia, and so I'm technically Chinese, and so I'm sort of a graft in that I married Steve, and then I ended up with the Taiwanese family, and just like learning all about culture. So I feel like almost sometimes I have like an outside perspective of what that means, but it's been really good because I think before when I was growing up I had no clue. So since that's good because I had a blank slate, so I didn't know anything. So I was actually learning all these things, and I think after we got married, and obviously we have two girls, so they're Taiwanese. So I feel like that's kind of when I kind of owning sort of that identity as a family.
And I think that it's not quite a question for we grow up in Taiwan, and because that my parents grew up there, and I grew up there. But I think that I have found out some consideration in American-born Taiwanese think about this issue, and I think the identity is something about the future, not for the past. And I think in the future who we will be is very important. Not really that the broader issue or some other issue. That's the main issue is that what really we will be, one will be in the future. And you can make a decision. You can make a decision. For the people in Taiwan, we can make a decision like we should be a Taiwanese, and we do not like to be Chinese in the future. And we commonly think that it will happen. No matter who you are and where you are from. And in the future, the people in Taiwan will go to somewhere that is not get together with China. So with the common willings, then we can get a better future. That's how I think about this question. And for the people in America, I think that's quite complicated because maybe the situation different. But I think this is the same. That it's not a past, a question of past.
So that, I guess I have a follow-up to that then. It's kind of like how recently, I don't know if you've heard, but in the States we've had an issue with a woman where she identified herself as black. She identified herself as black, and she got a lot of negative reaction for that because her parents said that she wasn't black, she was white. But she identified herself as black, and in that community, and understanding the oppression that comes with that. So, I guess for you, Jennifer, like when you're identifying like with the Taiwanese culture coming into your family, I guess it comes with like, well, what does identity come down to? Is it something that is genetics? Because as you said, Yongchong, like you got your blood tested, and you did find roots to it. But there's also the other layer of I'm a part of this because I feel like it. Like it not that I feel like it, but it's like this is a part of my family now. I'm being married into it, or I identify with it as my culture. This is something that I am familiar with. Even if my blood is not a part of that, I can still identify as a part of it. As my dad has said to me before, like this is something that, even though we're of mixed blood or whatever, we're able to identify with a certain identity or a certain culture just because we feel familiar with it. And how do you go about that? And what, like, is it okay to be identifying as a certain culture even if you are not blood related to it? Or again, that's a loaded question, but I mean that is an issue that as generations go on, more and more cultures will get mixed together. And how do you reconcile one with the other? Because each culture will have its past. It will have its hurt. No matter what culture you're from, there's always going to be some sort of hurt from it. And for the Taiwanese culture is 228 and being oppressed, but also in other cultures, it's also another form of oppression. However, when we see it from our vantage point, from our perspective, we tend to only see where our suffering is versus the background of other cultures' suffering. So I guess like how do you go about that? And like with through those lens, how do you identify yourself then?